All right, today we're talking about Harry Gensler and his article on cultural relativism. There's a picture of Harry Gensler. He is posing on top of a beautiful peak called Angel's Landing in Utah. I've been there myself. It's incredible. So that's from his personal website, apropos of nothing. Harry Gensler is, you see this SJ by his name. I don't know if you know what that stands for. It stands for Society of Jesus, which means Gensler is a Jesuit priest. The Jesuits are an order of priests in the Roman Catholic Church, and they are highly trained in philosophy. So the reading that we're doing is from Gensler's own Introduction to Ethics textbook. And it's unsurprising that a kind of traditional theist like Gensler would be a moral realist. And that's what he is. He's a moral realist. Now he's talking about cultural relativism. Let me flip ahead one slide. His article is about cultural relativism, and cultural relativism is a form of anti-realism. But Gensler is a moral realist. So I want you to be clear about this. Even though he's talking about cultural relativism, he's trying to refute it. He's not trying to defend it. Now, why is he talking about cultural relativism? Well, cultural relativism is one of these views which it seems like many undergraduates come into class somehow having adopted cultural relativism already as kind of an assumed starting place for ethics. Maybe not for everyone, but it's pretty common. And so Gensler thinks it's a wrong way to approach ethics. So he is trying to sympathetically engage with this view and talk about common reasons why people, especially college students, are likely to be attracted to it. And then he wants to show why those are misguided in his view. Well, what is cultural relativism? He's going to abbreviate this as CR. Cultural relativism is a view that says that good and bad are relative to your culture. So what is good is just whatever is socially approved in a given culture. And by culture here, I mean, that could mean your country. It could mean your, well, there's all kinds of different kind of ways of carving up what a culture is. It could mean your religious group. It could mean your family or kin group. It could mean your kind of more local circumstance. That's one of the issues about that we'll return to later. But the point is, whatever your culture is, whatever it approves of on this view is what defines right and wrong, good and bad. And what that means is there are no objective truths about right and wrong. Morality and moral facts, they don't exist independently of culture. They depend on people and what people and human cultures think and approve of. So it's not objective, it's subjective. All right. Now, here's why cultural relativism seems compelling to so many people. First of all, it seems to make sense out of the different moral codes of other cultures. Why is it that different cultures have other codes? Well, because every culture invents its own morality, and every culture is right by its own lights. Also, it seems like cultural relativism allows us to be tolerant of other cultures. We can never say that some other culture is wrong, because that would just be imposing our view on them, whereas actually, hey, if they approve of something, that's true for them and it's right for them. And who are we to say otherwise? So it seems like it encourages tolerance. It also seems like it gives us a basis for a common morality within our culture. So what's right and wrong in, say, the United States of America? Well, according to the cultural relativists, it's whatever Americans approve of. And so whatever we approve of, that's what's right in America. And so automatically, we've got one moral compass which can guide us in our national deliberations in our national life. All right, that's why cultural relativism seems compelling. And I think the issue of tolerance is especially important for many people, and especially for students. It seems arrogant to many people to to judge others and to say, you know, your beliefs and actually your whole way of life and maybe your whole culture's way of life are wrong, are morally wrong. You're totally living wrong and you're off track and your family's wrong, your mom's wrong, your dad's wrong, they're all wrong. That seems like a distasteful position to be in. Whereas cultural relativism seems like a cultural relativist would never do that because no, they're not wrong. They're right according to their own culture. Their culture defines what's right. Okay, that's why it seems compelling. Now we want to move into Gensler's objections to cultural relativism. Okay. So this first objection says, if cultural relativism is true, then we cannot consistently disagree with our society's morals. But that seems wrong. It seems like we can consistently disagree with our society's morals. Therefore, cultural relativism is false. This is a modus tollens form of argument. Now let me explain each of the premises. Premise one, the idea here is that if your culture defines what is right for all of its members, then it's automatically irrational and wrong for you to disagree with your culture. If you disagree with your culture, you're wrong. By definition, the culture is right. But that seems to rub us wrong. I mean, you could take Martin Luther King Jr. Well, he disagreed with his Southern segregationist culture. And if cultural relativism is true, he was automatically wrong. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. From the get-go, that was just a crazy, irrational thing to do. It doesn't matter that his views eventually changed the views of his culture. At the moment he started, he was dead against them. And so he was wrong. Maybe he became right later on when his culture changed with him, but that's beside the point. When he started his protest was automatically wrong. And the same would go for any moral dissident within their culture, if cultural relativism was true. But it seems like, wow, moral dissidents and moral reformers are often right. And there's nothing inconsistent about them going against their culture. That's what Gensler's objection is. All right, the second objection. If cultural relativism is true, then intolerance and racism are right in the societies that approve of them. But intolerance and racism are never right. Therefore, cultural relativism is false. Now, here's the idea. I mean, you go back to Dr. King. If you got a society like the segregationist South, or say antebellum South, where slavery is definitely a cultural value. Well, if your culture defines what's right in that culture, then by definition, racism is right in segregationist and slaveholding cultures. The Nazis are right in their own culture because their culture defines what's right for them. But that seems wrong. It seems like no matter what those cultures think, they're wrong. They're never right. They're not even right in their own culture. That's what Gensler thinks anyway, and many people are sympathetic with that view. So if premise 2 is right, then it seems like cultural relativism is false. Now, let me pause right here. There's always the cultural relativist. You might want to think about what could the cultural relativist say back to these arguments. And one thing they could always do is just bite the bullet and say, you know what? Premise 2 here is just false. Turns out sometimes intolerance and racism, they are right. I know, feels awkward to say, but they just are. That's one option. There might be other options too of ways that the cultural relativists could respond, but that's one possibility. The same goes for this last one. The relativist always could just say, no, Dr. King was wrong when he started disagreeing with this Southern segregationist culture. Premise 2 is false. I know we all love Dr. King, but he was crazy at the beginning. That's what the relativists might say. They might have another response too. You think about it, but they could always take the bullet biting response. All right, and objection 3 here, contradictory rules. If cultural relativism is true, then each of us have to accept our society's values, right? Because our society defines what's right for us. But premise 2 says if each of us is a member of many different societies with different values. Now, let me explain this. So I might be a member of many societies. I might be a member of, American society. I'm also a member of South Carolinian society. I'm also a member of my family as like a social group. I belong to voluntary organizations, right? Maybe clubs. Maybe I belong to religious groups. I belong to, professional society. I happen to belong to the American Philosophical Association and the South Carolina Society for Philosophy. And so, and you probably are too. All sorts of different social groups. And not just official groups, but even just kind of clusters of people. We're all members of many different societies, and these societies might have very different values. If cultural and sometimes contradictory values. Well, if cultural relativism is true, I have to accept the values of each of my social groups, each of my societies, and that means I have to accept contradictory values. So let's say, for example, that my family is totally against the use of marijuana and alcohol, but my college fraternity fully approves of the use of exorbitant amounts of alcohol and marijuana. Well, I'm a member of both those societies. What is right for me? Is it right for me or wrong for me to use marijuana or exorbitant amounts of alcohol? Both are true according to cultural relativism. Or say, for example, you're in the antebellum South again. You're in South Carolina, and you're a member of some dissident religious group which is against slavery. I'm aware. I think there were maybe several. I know the Quakers, and I think the Reformed Presbyterians. Anyway, there were probably many. I don't know. So, but let's say you're a member of one of those groups. Well, you're part of two societies. One is South Carolina society, and the other is, your dissident group, and they have conflicting values. What are you supposed to believe about slavery? You got to believe a contradiction, that it's both right and wrong. And that seems impossible, which is what premise 4 says. Accepting contradictions is impossible. So, conclusion, cultural relativism has got to be false. Got to be false. Now, I think there's a lot of interesting conversations we could have here. What could the cultural relativist reply about this? Is there a way that we should conceptualize societies that will get us out of this problem? Maybe, maybe not. Think about it. Okay, a couple other worries that Gensler raises here about cultural relativism. First of all, it seems to give us no way of settling disputes between societies. Why? Well, if my society thinks the right thing to do is, let's say we disagree about some piece of land. Let's say your society thinks that this piece of land belongs to this group of people, and my society thinks, no, it belongs to our group of people. And we believe that based on different moral frameworks that we have. I could give examples here. You could contrast Native American society and what they believed about land ownership with what the United States of America believed about land ownership. You could compare the Israelis and the Palestinians on what they think about disputed pieces of land and ownership and so forth. Any kind of social dispute between societies, there's no way of settling them. Why? Because automatically both cultures are right. There's no higher court of appeal. There's no final objective standard that both are beholden to. No, that they're both automatically right. And so there's no way to resolve that conflict. No argument to have, no reasons to appeal to. Secondly, cultural relativism makes it impossible to learn from the moral views of other cultures. Here's what I mean. Let's say, you know, I've been reading this year about Confucianism, which is one of the traditional philosophical viewpoints of China. Well, I can learn about Confucianism and about Chinese moral views, but I can't learn from them. That is, there would be no reason for me to ever change my own views based on what I read in Confucius. Why? Because I'm automatically right, because my views are my culture's views, and every culture is infallible. It defines what's right for it. Oh yeah, the Confucianism may be interesting, and it may be true in China, but in my culture, it's automatically wrong if it conflicts with mine, because all cultures are automatically infallible. So I've got nothing to learn from anybody else. I mean, I can learn about them, but I'm never going to change my views or critically examine them in light of somebody else's views, because I'm infallible. My culture's infallible. And that seems awkward. I mean, really? You can't learn from any other cultures? That seems even run against the spirit of what the cultural relativist wants to do. Okay, that for Gensler is, he thinks, well, the answer here is to ditch cultural relativism and to believe in moral realism. Moral realism is the view that says some things are objectively right and wrong, independently of what you, your culture, what anybody thinks or feels about it. It's just right to be kind to people. It's just wrong to enslave other races, no matter what your culture thinks. And Gensler thinks that moral realism can answer the three common arguments that are made in favor of cultural relativism. He thinks the moral realist has good answers to these. So let's look at the arguments that are made in support of cultural relativism and how the realist would answer them. First of all, people often say, look, morality is a product of culture, and that's why cultural relativism is true. And Gensler wants to say, well, sort of. I mean, sure, moral beliefs emerge from our cultures, but that doesn't mean that morality isn't objectively true. I mean, books also emerge from cultures. They're products of culture. Your physics textbook is a cultural product. That doesn't mean it doesn't contain objective truths. It does. So the mere fact that a set of beliefs or claims emerged from a culture doesn't mean that they are not objectively true for all cultures. Secondly, the relativist often says cultures disagree widely about morality. And Gensler wants to say, sure, they do disagree about a lot of things, but that doesn't mean that nobody is right or wrong about their disagreements. And we just have to throw up our hands. Cultures also disagree about physics, right? Ancient cultures thought that the world was geocentric, but they were wrong. They were objectively wrong. Cultures disagree about religion. Some believe in one religion and some in another religion, and some believe in no religion. Well, they can't all be right. I mean, either deities exist or they don't. Either there's one God or there's many. There can't be both one and many. So the mere disagreement doesn't entail that there's no right answers. Secondly, although there are disagreements among cultures, cultures do not disagree a whole lot on basic moral principles. They may disagree on some detailed applications, but on the most general basic moral principles, like don't kill innocent people, there's a lot of agreement. And then finally, or the third argument, the relativist wants to say, look, there's no way to resolve moral differences. When one culture disagrees with another, we've got no way to figure out who's right and who's wrong. Well, Gensler wants to say, wait a minute. Says who? There very well may be ways to figure out who's right and wrong and to resolve many of our moral differences. There may be very good arguments to be given for and against various views. But he says, even if there were no clear way to resolve moral differences, that wouldn't mean that there were no objective moral facts. Think about it this way. The spot that you're standing at right now, 1,000 years ago, exactly 1,000 years ago to the day, to the minute, either it was raining on that spot or it wasn't, right? It's got to be one or the other. There may not be any way for you to figure out which it was, whether it was raining at that spot or not. But that doesn't mean there's no object about it. It was objectively doing one or the other, whether you can figure it out or not. Now, the same thing applies with morality. Just because I can't figure out whether it's right or wrong to kill somebody doesn't mean, well, there's no right answer to it. It may leave me in a skeptical position, but it doesn't leave me thinking, well, it's neither right nor wrong. It is one or the other. And even if I can't figure out how to get it right, that doesn't mean both answers are right. If I flip a coin up in the air and it comes down and I cover it with my hand, you may not know whether it's heads or tails under my hand. But it is one or the other, whether you can know it or not. Okay. Where does Gensler leave us then after all this? Well, he's attempted to refute the arguments supporting cultural relativism and say those arguments are not ultimately compelling. But what he hasn't done is to put forward arguments in support of moral realism or in support of any particular version of moral realism. He still hasn't told us, how do we know moral facts? What's the evidence in favor of them? How do we resolve our moral conflicts? So this isn't a full-scale defense of the realist position. It's mainly been a critique of the relativist position, and he's shown some of the difficult implications of relativism. Now, one thing you might think about as you ponder Gensler is this question of tolerance. You know, so much of what drives relativism, at least at the popular level, is people want to be tolerant, and they think that relativism is the most tolerant philosophy, or maybe relativism is the only philosophy that really justifies tolerance. Well, here's a question for you. When, if ever, should we be tolerant of moral differences? When should we be tolerant of the moral beliefs and practices of others? And when should we be, quote unquote, judgmental or intolerant? And what exactly do we mean by tolerance? Right? So let's say there's somebody who holds abhorrent racial views, racist views. Should we be tolerant of that person? Should we be tolerant of their beliefs? Should we be tolerant of their speech in favor of their views? Should we be tolerant of their actions that they take that flow from those views? What does it mean to be tolerant? Does it mean we don't speak against them? Does it mean we don't legally punish them? Does it mean we don't socially penalize them? What does that mean? So, things to think about.